Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Payantam Vande Guru Param Param Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti Om, Namaste. Welcome to our Drg Drsya-Viveka. So, just a few of us today, but we are meant to keep the recording to our friends. And can you see me? Can you see me? Okay.
Yeah, see you here, Andy.
Okay. So we did the verse number 1 last week. The eye is the seer. This is the introduction of the Drg Drsya. Drg Drsya is a relatively simple but profound and very direct text, because it is such a meta discrimination after all. So we are discriminating the seer from the seen, and the experiencer from the experience, the illuminator from the illumined by the illuminator, and so on. In the first verse, the author presents the concept by which the following, the subsequent verse develop. Right? It says the eye is the seer, and then the color and form are the seen. The eye is the seen, and the mind becomes the seer. The witness alone, consciousness, is the real seer, and the mind with its thoughts and so on is the seen. So, as we know, Drg Drsya is broken into 3 levels. You see, we have so many Vedantic texts, and a lot of the time we see them subdividing the jiva for the sake of discriminating, our fundamental nature from the 3 bodies, for example. Why? Because we tend to identify with the body. So because we identify with the physical, the mental, and the subtle, we need to look into the experience of the Jiva Atma through these 3 bodies, and the ways in which we get mistakenly identified with the 3 bodies. So likewise, we do it with the five koshas. We subdivide again the Jiva into its 5 different realms or orders or levels of human experience, so that we can begin undoing, breaking with those mistaken identifications with those 5 levels, the food body, and then the prana body, and then the emotional body, the mind body, the intellectual body. So we can look into human experience. Fundamentally, what we are doing, we are trying to discriminate that which is the witness, subject, conscious, non-experiencing principle, which is consciousness, awareness. We are trying to discriminate that, to discern, to separate intellectually that from all experience we have. And here we are looking the same way. We are discriminating this consciousness, this awareness from the experiences we are having, but looking it from the point of view of the seer, the experiencer, and then the instruments by which it sees the world, it illumines the world, it experiences the world. So we experience through something, and this something is said to be the body-mind complex, which is but an instrument by which the Jiva Atma experience the world. So here the text is broken into 3 levels. It puts together the intellect and the mind, more or less like Viveka Shuddhamani. It puts together the intellect and the ego, as one center. Here it puts together the mind with its emotions, and then the intellect and the sense of doership, ownership. So these things, although the sense of doership, ownership of the ego does not come much into the equation, because it's only a question of experiencing the world and by which means, by which instruments I'm experiencing, so that I can begin breaking it down to understand that there is only one illuminator, there is only one seer, there is only one witnessing, and then this witnessing is something that is one, but it sees many, it's one, but it illumines everything, it's one experiencer experiencing everything, and then in the very end, we will understand not only the nature, the non-dual nature, only one, fundamentally, the Drg is one, and what it sees through all these different levels of the instrument of knowledge, perception, experience, what it does see through all of that is many, and it's many in varieties of forms and aspects that comes to us through the sense organ. But most fundamentally, when we come down to Drg, and then we have to understand that it's not only one, but it's the only seer, is the only illuminator, is the only experiencer which is not subject to change. Not only it's one, not only it cannot be seen, but it cannot be, it's not subject to change. Okay, which is the definition of Satchitananda. So it's one of the nature of non-duality. It's always there, always present at all times, okay? And seeing the world or reflecting the world, and without changing with the presence of this apparent world, okay? So this is the purpose of this simple text, but it can be very, very profound if we dig into it. So the verse number 2 say that the forms are many and varied on account of difference like blue, yellow, gross, subtle, short, long, etc. So all the properties of forms are going to be perceived by the eyes. So the forms are many and varied on account of the difference. Okay, the eye remaining the same sees them all. So, and then we have only one eye, and we see all difference, all varieties of names, colors, and forms. Okay, so that is what we're going to unfold a little bit here. It was said in the first verse that form is seen, and the eyes are the seer. The first quarter of the previous verse is explained now. The author says that the observed objects are many, and the observing eye is one. To see the green color, one uses the same eye that would be used to see a red color. So it's simple logic. It almost feels like I say that word, redundant. How you say that word again?
Redundant.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, those different angles, it's going to solidify this understanding in respect to first this duality, experiencer and experienced, or knower and known, and the way the experiencer is one, and this one is seeing varieties of seeing phenomena through the five sense organs, of course, and the mind. So we have seen that the eye can see many different colors. It's not that we need a new set of eye. Okay, now what's the color coming today? Oh, it's gonna be black. I say, okay, let me change my pair of eyes because I was using the blue eye. No, as we know, it's not necessary. It's one eye and it's going to see all colors, and not only all colors, all forms, all forms. This shows that there is plurality in Drishan and there is non-duality in Drg. So when we see something as the seer, as the illuminator, is one. Okay? In all the five, in the case of the sense, so all the five sense organs is one. Okay? The one that hears, the one that touches, the one that tastes, and the one that sees, and so on. So if there is only one, okay? So this shows that there is plurality from the standpoint of the seer, but the seer is always one. So we keep at that for the moment. In each plurality itself, there is variety. There is plurality of colors and so on. In the manifold manner of forms and colors are many varieties, whereas remaining single one eye. This discussion will be extended, and the consequence of this discussion will be evident once we come to consciousness awareness. So there is only one Drg, and then we'll see when it comes to consciousness, we're going to follow the same principle. There is only one seer, the one illuminator. But as I already anticipate, there is something that distinguishes consciousness from the other relative seers, and we'll see it. It will be said that in consciousness, there is no variety, there is no plurality, bigness, smallness, and etc. And that's where we have to come to a clear understanding that the consciousness is not the mind. Because if we take consciousness to be the mind, and then we feel like, I mean, it's one mind, but sometimes my mind is loving, sometimes my mind is angry. It almost seems that I have many minds. Okay, so there is one mind. The mind changes. Yeah? And the consequence of seeing what is the absolute seer, illuminator, is not only that consciousness is one and it sees everything through all these different levels of the equipment, the body-mind equipment, but the consciousness is one and never change. The mind changes again and again, and almost appears as if it is many minds, because it depends on how we look at the mind. If we look at the mind from the standpoint of its emotions, there are so many human emotions being experienced. So if I look at by the thinkings, my thought process, or my notions, my ideological convictions, and so on, it keeps changing as well. Sometimes in the same day. So in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it said that the ultimate consciousness is one. So here, the author, that we don't know exactly who wrote this text, but it seems to have been the guru of Vidyaranya. It says that the author is laying the foundation for the conclusion that comes in this verse. So it said, I'm going to start moving a little faster because the style of teaching of Swami Paramarthananda is very slow, and he breaks it with a lot of repetitions. So, and I don't want to bore you guys with excessive repetition. So it said that Drg Drsya is a text in which the Jiva Atma is analyzed. We have seen that before. We analyze the Jiva, and we have analyzed not only the Jiva, but the aspects of Jagata, because the Jiva is going to be experiencing, seeing, illuminating, knowing, witnessing Jagata, which is the world of objects. So we're going to look into this interaction between Jiva Atma and Jagata. And Ishvara is now going to be involved in this analysis of experience. So we have seen that, we understood that, but yet it's a Vedantic text that gives us a wide vision, of the Upanishads. Since the analysis is in the form of the observer and observed division, the text is called Drg Drsya-Viveka, discrimination between the seer and the seen. In the first 5 verses, the author is talking about the nature of the individual Jivatma, who is a composite entity consisting of several layers. Okay. Again, here we will present with 3 layers, but we can extend easily to 5 layers if you consider that the sense organs themselves, they have a denser aspect, which are the sense instruments. When we look at the sense instruments, we are addressing the physical body, and then the body appears to be the seer. Why? Because if I close my eyes here, and then the seer disappears, and my physical eyes belongs to my physical body, and then the physical body appears to be the seer. So we can break the physical body as a seer, and then the sense organ, the seeing organ, the organ that belongs to the mind. But yet it's there in between the mind, between the subtle body and the physical body. The sense organ becomes the seer, and becomes the seer even of one's physical instruments as well. Okay, so we have the body, and then we have the sense organs, and then we have the mind. The mind is something that, as we know, is our primary instrument of knowledge experience. Why? Because it's what sees. It is what sees the sense organs in the world. So then we have the world, and the mind sees the sense organs, sees the sense instruments, and the world. Why it sees the sense instrument? Because in the morning when I get up, I say, oh my God, my eyes are very foggy. I mean, I can't see very much. So let me watch my eyes. So my sense, my instruments of seeing knows that the physical instrument, my organ of seeing knows that my physical instrument of seeing needs some wash. Okay, so. But generally speaking, we are going to divide this in 3 types of human experience, okay? The seer number 1, the seer 2, and the seer 3. Seer 1, seer 2, seer 3 is what makes up what we call the individual Jivatma. So what is the Jivatma? Okay, is the absolute seer, and then associated with what? Associated with the second seer, which is said to be here the 2, and then the 1, which is the sense instrument. So we have the sense instrument as said to be the number 1 seer, the one in contact with through the instruments of perception to the world. So we have that one, and then we have the mind who sees the sense organ, and then we have consciousness. So what is an individual? The individual is a seer composed by these 3 principles, okay? These 3 seers, the absolute seer, and then the relative seer, meaning to say the mind, and then the sense organs, which is the sense organs, which is the number 1 seer. So when we put together the mind, consciousness, and the sense instruments, and then we have what? We have Jivatma. Okay. So now what happens with the Jivatma when he's in deep sleep, for example? Where is the Jivatma? Yeah. So the Jivatma shrank back into Anamaya Kosha, okay, in Anandamaya Kosha, and there is no question of experiencing knowing entity. As we know, when we do go into deep sleep, we are no longer existing as an experiencing entity. How do we exist in that condition is subject to other conversation. we could say we exist as existence consciousness, okay? Or we exist as the prana jiva, which is not really experiencing and knowing anything other than itself, we could say. So that's the approach here. The first relative seer is the sense organ. And from that standpoint, the external world is the object. So now we have the world, we have the sense organs, and then the sense organs are the first seer, okay? Then the sense organs themselves are seen, they are experienced, and so they become the object. And from that standpoint, the mind becomes the seer. So the mind is the seer number 2, okay? So likewise, the mind becomes seen, and something else will see the mind. And this something else, we could say it is Sakshi Chaitanya or consciousness. So as I mentioned to you, when I unfold these texts in Portuguese, I was sometimes breaking as well the subtle body with the intellect. The intellect is what, it's where we exercise our discrimination, our discernment and decisions and so on. Okay, we exercise our choice there. It's, you know, it's a determining aspect, faculty of our subtle body. But at the same time, it has an ability to watch, to observe. The intellect is a great observer, and the more refined it is, it observes the movements of mind itself. Okay, so it can observe the mind, the thoughts. It can even observe mind's, you know, suggestions of whether I like it, I don't like it. Is it going to be good to me? So people who do meditation, they know that there is a subtle aspect of the mind which observes thought patterns and the emotional patterns, and then the sequence of images and thoughts that come. So that could also be said to be aspect, another component of this Jiva Atma, experiencing the world through the intellect that sees the mind objectively, and then the mind is seen, and the intellect is the seer. So is the intellect the absolute seer? No. Why? Because the intellect can be seen as well, and that becomes very tricky, because who sees the intellect? You understand? So the intellect is from where the sense of I observe the ego, right? Is the I thought. Who observed the I thought? So the real observer of the I thought is not an experiencing entity, but it is the absolute seer. It's the absolute experiencer, the absolute illuminator, although it's not an experiencing entity. It's just pure seeing, pure illumination, pure witnessing, and so on. This consciousness itself is not objectified or seen by anything else, as we know. So that's why it is the absolute seer. There is nothing that can objectify and experience or know consciousness. And this is, again, nothing new to us, because we know that we are searching and seeking for a clear view and conviction of what we really are. And this search shapes itself almost as if we are searching for our true self. But the scriptures, they say over and over again that what we are searching cannot be objectified, cannot be known, cannot be perceived, cannot be experienced objectively. So likewise, this mind, this consciousness, this Atma will never be seen by anything else, okay? Yet it is integral part of our human experience as a seer, as an illuminator, as an experience. Why? Because the Jiva Atma is a composition of the absolute seer and all the relative seer, regardless of how many we break them into, okay? So this Atma, this self, is the true seer, will never be seen. Therefore, it's said to be the absolute seer, the true seer. And again, although it is not an experiencing entity, it does become when it identifies with one of those levels, identifies with the intellect, the observer. Yeah, I often like to present the intellect as the very subtle observer. This is the language that I brought from the times before I met Vedanta, when I had my early satsangs, the pure, the very subtle observer, the observing phenomenon. So that is already an experiencing entity, you know. It sees and it feels what? It feels ananda, because the mind is so sattvic that it's just, it experiences. But then the mind starts moving, and then it starts seeing the mind, seeing the emotion, seeing the thoughts coming and go, and then the mind becomes seen by this experiencing, knowing, observing entity called the subtle intellect. But when we go into Atma, the self, there is no question of any other principle illumining and seeing, experiencing Atma. Therefore, we will never find the self, our true fundamental nature, in an objective way. But yet the scriptures always say that we must understand and know who you are. How I'm going to know how I am? It's very, very simple, as we know here. Thus, two relative seers plus one absolute seer makes up this individual Jivatma, which is called Jivatma because there is Atma, the Jiva self. There is self there. And then it is self, Jiva self plus the equipment of experience / knowledge. So we are analyzing how experience takes place, and then in the end, we're going to separate all relative seers, which belongs to the equipment, so that we can isolate the absolute seer. And although knowing that it's not an experience entity, we must understand the importance and the need to claim our identity with that principle and not with the intellect or the mind or the sense organs or the pranas or the physical body. The first verse is a summarizing verse, which is the author explains, author himself explained in later verse. So the first verse is a summary, and then as we go into the second, third, it's just an unfoldment of the first verse. You know? In the first verse, this is Swami Paramarthananda. It really breaks down the text and explains in a very didactic way. On the first, the verse 1, the first seer is explained. The verse 2, the second seer is explained. In the verse 3, the third absolute seer is explained. In the verse 4. So far, we have seen the first and the second verse. In the second verse, the author said how every sense organ is the seer and every relevant sense object is seen. The word relevant, so often we use another word, respective or relevant. Here, Swami Paramarthananda is saying the word relevant is used because with respect to the eye, the object is the forms and colors. With respect to the ear, the object is sound. And with every one of our sense organs and sense instruments, they can only capture their relevant or respective objects of perception, okay? Because every instrument was created for different sort of objects of perception, which came from one of those 5 subtle elements, as we know. The size of the sense objects are varied, but the eye is one and the same. Without undergoing any change, remaining the same, the eye illumines all the varied sense objects. The forms they mention, they are many, but the eye is one. We have the term that. Therefore, Drishyam is many and Drik is always one. This has to be noted specifically because when we come to the absolute seer later on, it can be said that the absolute seer is Advaita. So it's one, and it's Advaita, and as I have anticipated, it's the only one of the seers that does not modify in contact with the seen. Non-dual consciousness is the absolute seer. Then only we can establish that the absolute seer is not limited by time, space. The infinitude of the absolute seer is established by establishing no duality. And no duality is another way to point to the fact that something that is non-dual is something that does not change. If there is only one without a second, there is no possibility of any change. Only when there are two or one with a few inclusions, a few qualities or attributes, and then this one is subject to change because there is a play between two factors. So we're going to establish the non-dual nature of the absolute seer. From an understanding of a non-duality, one understands infinitude. Now we go to the seer number 2, the verse 3. So the verse number 3, I don't know if I read in English, the verse 2. The verse 2 said the forms are many and the eye is one. The 3 is going to say the mind is one and the same, and the mind is going to see different characteristics of the eye, such as blindness, dullness, and sharpness. Okay, we are analyzing the eyes, but this is the case for all other sense instruments and sense organs. Okay, it applies to the ears, to the skin, and to the nose, and so on. So the verse 3, the mind remaining the same knows the different characteristics of the eye. So the eye was seeing the world. But then, as I was saying before, there is something that can see the eye. So you can see that, oh, my eyes is not doing well today for some reason. I mean, I woke up today. One time I remember I woke up and there was a huge spot in my eye. I would move like that, and it was a little bit scary because I was much younger. I was maybe on my mid-30s, and I was like shocked. Okay. So there is something that can see the condition of the eyes. Yeah? So what is that can see? Oh my God, I guess I'm getting blind here. My eyes are not seeing well. Oh my God, I need to change my pair of glasses again. Yeah? So the mind is the seer in that case. The mind remains the same. It's only one, and is going to see the sense organs by observing its change, its modification, its characteristics, okay? For all the 5 sense organs, it's going to note that something is changing, which is the nature of meteor. And then the eye can observe the characteristic of dullness, sharpness of the eyes, and even blindness. We are going to all the extremes. Sharpness, absolute perfect seeing, and then blindness, and then all those intermediary conditions. There is something there that is seeing all of that. How can I see? How can I see if my eyes are the seers? I don't see anything. No, I mean, Ishvara has made us in such a way that there is a seer that sees even the instrument and the organ of vision. It sees the conditions. How you know? Because I see that my eyes are, and I don't need a mirror. I just see it because the mind is said to be a sort of another sense organ, the sixth sense organ. The mind sees the world and sees even its very instrument of perception, the organs, the equipment. It knows, oh no, my ears, I have now a new noise going on here. So who is seeing that? And it's not a noise that anybody can hear. It's something internal that only you can, So there is something that is a subtler seer in this process of seer, seeing. It's a subtler illuminator that somehow illumines and reveals the condition of each one of my 5 instruments of perception and 5 sense organs. The mind remains the same, but it can witness the conditions of each one of our sense organs and sense instruments. So the author here is presenting 3 levels of perception of the sense organs. So the mind can perceive a perfect perception, total perfection, and then can see a total no perception. So those are the 2 extremes, and we see it can perceive in between these 2 extremes. So this is the 3rd condition, partial perception and partial non-perception. So again, we go back to the metaphor of the snake and the rope. So depending on the time of the day, depending on the time of the day, if it's in the middle of the night and there is no moon, and then there is total non-perception. There is absolute no perception. It could be a real snake, it could be just a rope, but none of that is relevant because there is total non-perception, okay? No functioning of the perception. So if it is in the day, with the sunshine around 1 or 2 in the afternoon, there is total perception. But then there is a twilight, in which we perceive things, but we are not sure about what is being perceived. Now, and in all 5 levels of the sense 5, the 5 sense, we can have these 3 conditions. So when it's sharp, when it is really, absolutely not available, and when it is in between. Total perception and total no perception are the 2 extremes in between. And then the 3rd condition is partial perception. There are these 3 conditions: full function of the sense organ, full non-function, and partial function that are possible for every one of our sense organs. And who is determined, who is seeing this? It is a seer, as we know. Who is the seer behind the ears, behind the palate? Who is the seer behind the eyes? So by the power of this seer, the eyes can see, the ears can hear, the mind can experience. So there is something subtler. Total perception, partial and no perception are the 3 conditions, but and it relates to every sense organ. All these conditions are known to eyes. So again, we need to define what is this eyes? I, us, me, I. It's seen by whom? By I. And then we go back to Upadesha. What is this I? What is this I? The I who is saying, no, I'm perceiving the conditions of my five sense organs. No? So it's seen by I. So it's seen in this case, on this level, it's known and seen by I, the mind. The mind, subtle aspect of my human experience. So I have the five sense organs, the five sense instruments. I see Jagat, the world, and I'm defined as I, the mind. Okay, I'm no longer defined I, the body. I'm defined as I, the sense organs. No, I'm defined as I, the mind. Why? Because I'm very smart. I can see the varieties of perceptions. Therefore, I cannot be what I say. I see. If I see that my perception, my equipment, my instrument of perceptions keep changing, okay? And then I am the subtle aspect within this experience. So I'm not the body, I'm not the sense organ, I am the mind. No? The mind experience or illumines these three conditions of each one of our sense organs. The mind is the seer, number 2, even though the conditions are many and varied, the mind does not undergo any change. And the mind is one, is non-dual, and perceives all the change in the scene. And the scene now is a little subtler than seeing the world, but I'm seeing the very instruments by which I see the world. The sense organs are seen, the mind is the seer, and the mind is one. And the variety of my sense organs are many. These conditions are variable with regard to the sense organs, and they don't belong to I, the mind. So the conditions of the ear, the eye, and the olfactory, how you say, olfactory, the nose and the tongue, and all these different perceptive functions we have, all these conditions are known by me. And then they change a lot. So do I need to change my mind every time they change? Again, no, I don't need to change my mind. The mind is one. The mind is there capturing, perceiving the change in my sense organs. Okay, five senses, they change. Sometimes they are very sharp, sometimes they are really almost not even there. And there is something that's perceiving this seer, this relative seer, which is a little denser. The mind is subtler, the mind is perceiving that. Therefore, they change the varieties, the variations of the sense organs belongs to whom? Does not belong to the mind, belongs to the sense organs. Okay, the sense organs, they are subject to change. Okay, everything is subject to change, and from a different angle, we will observe that also the mind is subject to change, but in relationship with the sense organ, the mind is one. And now we blame what? We blame on the sense organ. I don't see well because my organ of vision is no good. And then from another angle, we say, hey, wait a moment, sometimes the problem is not really in the sense organ, but you are not seeing well because your mind is very disturbed, okay? The mind also changed, but this is another conversation. From this standpoint, the mind does not change. The change in the sense organs belongs to the sense organs, not to the mind. The mind remains the same and is not affected by the pluralities and varieties of the sense organs conditions. When the act of perception is changed, when the act of perception is changed, the eye to the ear, a different mind is not required. This is brilliant. This is beautiful. It's another example. So I'm here, I'm dealing with a scene, and then comes a noise that calls my attention. And then my mind was just there operating through the eyes, perceiving the world, okay? And then came a strong sound, and then my mind just divert its attention to the sound, okay? And then what happened with their mind? Is the mind the same or it's another set of mind? No, the mind is one and the same, okay? It's just operates through these 5 channels that connect us with the instruments and the world when it is relevant to respective object, and the mind being only one and the same. We don't need to change our mind every time we utilize one of these 5 channels of contacting the world. A different mind is not required. Here again, the principle of the observed being many by the observer is one applies. This principle can be extended to all other 4 sense organs, such as ear, skin, etc. Thus, the seer, too, the mind that was introduced in the first verse, has been explained in this 3rd verse. Next, the absolute seer is going to be unfolded. So the verse number 4. So how are you guys doing there? Any questions? So the verse number 4. Consciousness remaining the same illumines the thoughts of desire, willingness, doubt, belief, disbelief, fortitude, and its lack, modesty, understanding, fear, and such others. This is the verse 4. So consciousness is one, is the same, and it's going to see something that before was present as the seer, the seer, the real seer, the mind is the seer. Now consciousness, we are skipping the subtle observer, the intellect. Now consciousness, which is not an experiencing entity, is said to be the true light of consciousness, which illumines the mind. So it illumines the minds. It's going to reveal its emotional feelings, of desire, anger, doubt, belief, notions, fortitude, modesty, fear. So everything that belongs to the mind, thoughts and feelings, basically the mind brings about a thought, connect to the object, it contacts, brings a thought, and with that thought, it comes a sensation, a feeling, an emotion, okay? So the mind is going to be seeing these different aspects of the mind, described here as different thoughts and emotions, such as desire, trust, doubt, belief, disbelief, and so on. So consciousness illumines and perceives the thoughts and emotions. And that is the absolute seer. Very simple. Let's see how Swami P unfolds this way. In the previous verse, the mind was introduced as the seer too, which was a relative seer. In this verse, the author says that the mind itself is seen, it is experienced, it is illumined, and it is clearly known by something else. The mind goes through different emotional conditions, such as happiness, jealous, and so on. In addition, there are several cognition conditions of the mind, such as ignorance, knowledge, partial ignorance, partial knowledge, doubt, and etc. So what he's saying here is that there are conditions of the mind, all kinds of conditions relate to thoughts and emotions, but there are conditions which are cognitive conditions, okay? My knowledge, my ignorance, okay? My partial knowledge, my partial ignorance, and my doubts. So all these fluctuations of the mind is seen by something which is other than the mind. Okay, so the cognitive here it's presenting the mind goes through different emotional conditions, but the mind, in addition to the thought feeling aspect of the mind, in addition to that, there are also several cognition conditions which are related to the intellect, which is another function of the mind. So the intellect, that is the one who says, okay, I got it, okay, ooh, but now I begin doubt. So the intellect is the one addressing, and analyzing and trying to come to a conclusion, to a determination. So the cognition conditions of the mind, which is a function of the intellect, is going to experience knowledge. Oh, I don't know, I can't make up my mind. Ignorance, partial knowledge. Stay in doubt. We often present the emotional aspect of the mind as the doubting function, because the mind, every time it gets in contact with the field of objects, immediately the mind starts questioning the experience. So do I want it? Do I like it? So shall I run or shall I stay? And so this is the initial aspect, emotional aspect of the doubting mind. But when it goes to the intellect can also go through certain doubts, which is purely cognitive. Okay, but it shouldn't take long. On the emotional mind level, the mind can remain there for a long time. But on the upper level, the mind, the intellect is going to say, okay, no, I don't know about that. Oh, I know about that. Or I take my chance. This is my take, and I know I may be wrong. End of story. So this is the cognitions that belong to the subtle aspect of the mind. All of this is seen by consciousness, as we know. What is the proof that these conditions are experienced? Why are they experienced if consciousness, the absolute seer, is not an experiencing entity? And then Swami P presents the question. So what is the proof that the conditions of the mind, even cognitive conditions, are really there being experienced? And then he comes with the answer. What is the proof? I say, if they are not experienced, we will never talk about them. So we talk about them, it means we experience them. And then what is this experiencer, the seer, of the conditions of the mind, including the cognitive conditions of the intellect? What is the seer? It's not an experienced entity, but it is experienced. Otherwise, we would not be talking about, oh, my intellect today. I mean, I don't get it today. I'm totally foggy, I'm tamasic, and so on. So we say things on those terms. It means that although consciousness is not an experiencing entity, there is an experience in which I can determine the condition of my intellect, for example, and this is a very subtle conversation, because the consciousness is not really an experienced entity, but experience takes place in the intellect, and the subtler the intellect, the subtler will be its experience. It's almost as the intellect is just experiencing its own very natural condition as a reflector, you understand? Even though we experience these varied conditions, they are known to us. In the Drsya-Viveka Upanishad enumerates them in the first chapter, fifth Brahmanam. The author borrows those analyses, borrows that enumeration list them in here. The list that they say here: desire, making plans to implement the desire, doubt as to whether the plan will be successful, faith in God, faith in Guru, scriptures, lack of faith, willpower and steadfastness, diffidence, modesty, knowledge, fear, etc. All these conditions of the mind are illumined and made known by consciousness. Okay. Very, very nice, huh? So it leaves us wondering. Yeah? Leaves us wondering, what is this me that is not an experiencing entity, yet experience the condition of my very intellect, which is the instrument of knowledge and experience. Huh? All of these conditions of the mind, which include the intellect, are illumined and revealed by awareness, consciousness. And all of that while it remains changeless. Now it brings the word changeless. Nirvikaraha, that which never changes. It observes phenomena, observes the mind, the intellect without ever changing. Okay, so let's stop here. My throat is not so good, and I better get better because I'm gonna go to a marathon of many hours every day. And I will be sending the video together with some notes of our next class, as we have agreed, Wednesday, same time as today. Okay? Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, my dear friends. We meet again next Wednesday. Love you. Stay well. Arrivederci.
Thanks, Ananda.
Hasta luego.
Bye now.
Hasta luego.
Bye then.
Bye.
Hasta luego.